Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Last night, the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party was center stage in the primary debate, but that won't be the case in just a few hours. Joe Biden will be flanked by Senators Kamala Harris and Cory Booker in debate night 2. The standout moment from the first round featured Biden and Harris when the California senator went after the former VP's record on busing. But Biden now says he was too polite to Harris. So what can we expect from him tonight? CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe asked Biden's deputy campaign manager, Kate Bedingfield.
He will be prepared to defend his record. I think our opponents have telegraphed that they intend to attack him tonight, and he's certainly going to be prepared for that. First and foremost, he's going to be making his case to Trump, though. I know there's been some suggestion that he's spoiling for a fight, and the only fight that he's spoiling for is one with Donald Trump. So you're going to hear him make the case tonight for a dramatic change from the kind of leadership that we currently have in the Oval Office. And if his opponents try to mischaracterize or distort his record, he'll defend it. He'll defend himself. But first and foremost, the fight he's looking for is a fight with Donald Trump, and that's what you're going to hear from him tonight.
And Ed O'Keefe will join us in just a moment, but for now, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Antjuan Seawright, and Leslie Sanchez. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Antjuan is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. And Leslie is a CBS News contributor and Republican strategist. Welcome to all of you. Caitlin, let me begin with you. Can you remind us why Joe Biden is so focused on Trump? What are the other candidates going to make sure he can't do tonight?
Right. Well, Joe Biden's theory of the case from the very beginning has been that he is best positioned to defeat Donald Trump, that he's best positioned to win back some of those voters who voted for Obama before and switched over to Trump in the last election. And especially you can expect him to kind of use the backdrop of Michigan to try to help his case. But he also learned a lot from that last debate when Kamala Harris went after him on the issue of busing. She really gained a lot of momentum quickly after that debate, and they were caught off guard. He said before, just last week when I was with him in Detroit, that he might not be as polite on this debate stage tonight. He's ready to defend his record, but he also wants to keep the focus on his end goal, which is being the nominee, winning the nomination, and eventually taking on Trump. So from a strategy perspective, it makes sense for the campaign that has been really under fire for the past several weeks from his opponents to try to move the debate closer to a general election argument. We'll see, though, if his rivals let him do that.
And Ed O'Keefe has just joined us now. Ed, thanks for being with us. You have some new reporting on how the Biden campaign is reporting. A senior campaign official talked about what Biden is going to do tonight.
That's right. Well, we had a conversation with a few of them earlier, Tanya. Good to see you. And essentially, what they're trying to do, or what the vice president hopes to do tonight, is sort of redirect the conversation away from him, away from the differences that Democrats may have amongst themselves, and back on President Trump, the person that they're all looking to defeat. Basically, we'll make the argument that it's the president that needs to go, that he has been an embarrassment on the world stage, that he's been detrimental to the economic well-being of working-class Americans, and he's going to try to keep the focus on the president. Problem for any candidate is you can telegraph what exactly you intend to do, what you hope to do, how you would try to answer the questions, but you have no control over what might ultimately prevail, especially in the early moments of a debate when opinions on the candidates can really calcify quite quickly. So we'll see whether his opponents agree that they should focus instead on the president, or whether they come for him. And if they do, the Biden team makes clear he will defend his record. He will call out any ridiculous attacks by lesser-known opponents who are trying to make a name for themselves tonight. And we'll see where it goes.
And so, Antjuan, speaking of the president and whatever issues of vulnerability he might have from the Democratic perspective, we know that lately he's been putting race at the forefront of his campaign strategy. Last night, we saw Marianne Williamson get a certain number of people standing up and listening closely when she started talking about reparations. What did you make at that moment of the debate last night?
Well, I think it was a very defining moment in the debate for her. Race has been a center issue for this country, especially since Donald Trump has taken office. whether you agree with his style, his rhetoric, his delivery or not, this became a bigger issue. We've seen hate crimes rise. We've seen white supremacists feel empowered. We've seen some of the right-wing toned down racial rhetoric being used freely in unique places that we have not seen before. And I'm sharing my experiences that I hear about from my sharecropping grandparents growing up in South Carolina. So we see things kind of evolve back from a very dark place in history. But tonight, look for race to be a centerpiece of the conversation. We're in Detroit, Michigan. We have a large segment of African-American voters, some who felt left out, especially during the 2016 campaign, but also look for Joe Biden to make it an issue. He built his campaign structure around this idea of race when his first video was Charlottesville, reminding people of the president saying there was two sides to Charlottesville. So look for race to be a big issue, and the fact that you have two African-American candidates on the stage.
Do you expect reparations to come back up again? Because we know even under President Obama, he didn't really want to discuss it.
I think it'll come up in some way, shape, or form. I think the difference between last night and tonight is you'll see the candidates focus really on an African-American agenda, specifically around economics, that you can relate to or rub against the idea of reparations and how do we move the ball forward so we do not repeat places in our history.
Right. All right. Now, last week, Senator Cory Booker said Biden was, quote, the architect of mass incarceration. Caitlin, you asked Booker's press secretary, Sabrina Singh, about that earlier and whether we can expect Booker to go after Biden a little more tonight. Let's listen.
I think it is fair to say that Cory's never going to back down from speaking truth to power. And if there is a moment tonight on stage that requires some truth telling, he's definitely going to do it. So I think it can come up. But you know what? I think what voters really want to hear tonight is, what's your vision for the future? How are you going to grow the economy? That is what voters really want to hear. And so we also really want to talk about the issues that matters to people tuning in for the first time, or to people that, are like us and live and breathe this every day. I think it's really important that, we do talk about race, we do talk about the criminal justice reform system, but we also talk about the economy and women's reproductive rights and climate change, all of those issues.
And so, Caitlin, what did Singh say about Booker's takeaways from last night's debate? I'm sure he was watching very closely.
Yes, they were watching. They're watching to see how the moderators are posing these questions, how the debate kind of shaped out last night, and how they could kind of strategize around, choosing and picking their battles is what the campaign has described how they'll approach the debate tonight. What was really interesting, though, is that just a week ago today, I was in Detroit and I asked Cory Booker when he was here for the NAACP conference what he thought about Joe Biden's then newly released criminal justice reform plan, and he called him the architect of mass incarceration, and he really went after him, was very critical of him last week. You heard from Sabrina there, though, that might not be the approach that they want to take tonight. Cory Booker needs to get his poll numbers up. He needs to make more of an impact in this race. Does he do that by attacking Joe Biden in a more forceful way, kind of taking the route that Kamala Harris took last time around and saw momentum gained from that? Or standing next to him actually on the stage, does he take a different approach? It's much easier sometimes to issue these threats through press releases, or these criticisms, I should say, through press releases or on Twitter, or even in conversations with reporters. But once you're standing on stage next to that person, we'll see kind of if that changes the dynamic at all. But certainly criminal justice reform is an issue that Cory Booker wants to talk about tonight, especially here in Detroit, and something that he wants to kind of be on the offense on.
But Antjuan, both Booker and Harris have already qualified for the September debate. So do they really need to go up against Biden at this point?
Well, I think, and talking to several campaigns, including the Biden and Booker campaign, is I think they realize this. Every time they go after Joe Biden, it ends up backfiring on them in the long term. We saw Kamala Harris aggressively, not necessarily go out after Joe Biden, but really highlight the differences between the two on busing. Well, long and short, the end of that story is but Joe Biden widened his lead and strengthened his support among African-American voters. But in talking to Kamala's top lieutenants today, two of them, and I spoke to them on my way here to the studio, what they said was she's going to focus tonight on flushing out her Medicare her Medicare for All plan, because they know how important the issue of health care is to people in Michigan, but also how we bring this country together, because I think they realize after traveling the country, the way you show Democrat primary voters you can fight is not against each other, but that you can fight against the opposition. I think that everybody's starting to realize what I said the last time we were all together, is that we're running for our party's nomination and not against each other. But the other candidates on the stage who are on political life support, look for them to take shots to make themselves relevant in the conversation.
All right, let's pivot a little bit now to President Trump, because he has called himself the winner of last night's debate. So Leslie, the next question is for you, but Caitlin spoke to the the campaign's national press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, earlier. So let's play a little bit of that exchange first.
Sleepy Joe, as he calls him, might awaken tonight. We'll see, because he has promised to bring the fight, whatever that means. We'll see if he's able to do that. But we certainly aren't afraid of Sleepy Joe bringing the fight. We would welcome him as a general election candidate.
So there's Kayleigh McEnany saying, hey, bring it on, Joe Biden, we'd welcome it. But what do you make of President Trump's attention to the debates? It seems, do you think he's more likely to be watching more closely this time? You think we'll see some more tweets tonight?
Sure. I think anything with Joe Biden there that the president's going to have an interest in, because for every indication, he would be the nominee. If the Democratic Party goes with the establishment candidate, and what that ticket would look like, nobody really knows. What that platform would look like, it's really hard to say. But this is a fair bet. And I think that's what the president's strategically looking at, how many times his name comes up. And it gives him the ability to get engaged even during the debate, which is what we want to watch for, some sort of Trump tweet storm,
right,
where he takes all the oxygen off Twitter anyway,
right,
and starts being a bigger topic of conversation. I think that plays right into what he's doing.
He didn't say too much about last night.
He didn't see much of a threat last night. I mean, who knows why he doesn't? But I mean, if you were a betting person, that's more than likely the reason.
So then what do you think the Trump campaign sees as Biden's biggest weakness? What's the Achilles heel from the Trump campaign's perspective?
Sure. So the advantage you have in having a long legislative record is that you have a momentous amount of experience. He has such a depth at many branches of government. You cannot deny that about Joe Biden. And he does have a history of reaching across the aisle. On extreme sides, both on the left and the right, and he's been criticized for that as well. The downside of that is you have a very long legislative record that can be criticized, such as the case in point with Cory Booker talking about incarcerations. That, if you're going to get into a policy issue, there's plenty there for the Republican National Committee, the Trump campaign, ads can be cut to draw distinctions between the president saying we're on riding a robust economy, I'm cutting regulation, we're making things work for people across the socioeconomic spectrum, and changing horses now, midstream, before I can execute all the plans we want to do to really reform and strengthen the country is not a good move. So that's where it's ultimately landed.
Antjuan, you look like you want to weigh in there.
No, I was agreeing. I was actually agreeing with Leslie.
Thank you. We're done. We're done.
Don't think I'm a Republican, but I tell you, in talking to 3 of Biden's top lieutenants today, I think you'll hear from them of how his policy agenda will speak directly to white and African-American working class voters in the state of Michigan and in the Rust Belt. The one thing we know from the midterms, there were 2 people who will be on that stage tonight that went across the country and were able to campaign in what I define as red to blue states and districts. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Fortunate for Biden, he was the most requested surrogate in the 2018 midterms all across this country, including being deployed to Michigan and the Rust Belt time and time again. And so his relationships are strong in the area. So look for him to speak to his relationships and his knowing the area, but also look to Kamala to speak to her relationships with the African-American community in the state of Michigan, because she was endorsed yesterday by the Michigan Legislative Black Caucus, which is a big deal. I've never seen in my political lifetime the entire group endorse one candidate in a primary.
That is a big deal. There's a lot at play in Michigan, a lot going on. Ed, last night, Mayor Pete Buttigieg made climate change part of his closing statement, saying time is running out to fix problems for the next generation. You spoke with Governor Jay Inslee earlier this week about how he's been preparing for tonight. Climate change has been his top issue. Let's listen.
I've been listening to people across the country who've been victimized by the climate crisis. And that's preparing me for a debate where I am going to espouse what I believe has to be the top priority of the United States, and that's to mobilize our country against this threat of the climate crisis. And I'm ready for that.
What is the definition of
So, Ed, how likely is it that climate change will dominate tonight's debate? And if not, how does the governor plan on breaking through overall?
It came up in conversation last night, Tanya, but didn't nearly dominate as much time as healthcare did. That's to the detriment of someone like Jay Inslee, one of very few sort of single issue candidates in this race. He essentially, anytime you ask him a question, it's noun, verb, climate change. Noun, verb, climate change. And that's fine if it were a central issue of concern, but it's not. It's healthcare, it's income inequality. Climate change is maybe a top 5 issue, top 4, depending on the poll, but it's not something that dominates the discourse and certainly hasn't dominated the debates. And, you know, anything sort of short of him getting 15 minutes to talk about climate change is going to be a disappointment to him, and he'll flail his arms and claim that the thing is rigged against him. But honestly, this is not a cycle that welcomes single issue candidates as much as may have been the case in the past. You saw Eric Swalwell trying to run on the issue of gun control, and he's already gone. You've seen a few others try to raise certain issues of concern, but none of them are able to break through because they're not named Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. And so if he really wants to keep focused on that, fine, but he's going to hit a ceiling if he hasn't already, and it's going to be tricky for somebody like him to continue playing ball.
Right. All right. Caitlin, as Ed just mentioned there, healthcare was a huge topic in last night's debate, if not the topic. Senator Harris put out a proposal earlier this week, and you spoke with her press secretary, Ian Sams, earlier about the criticism that plan has faced. Let's listen.
I think that it's important to understand where she is on this issue. She was for Medicare for All when she came into the Senate in 2017. She's been for it all campaign. She's for it now. What's changed is that over the last 6 months, she's listened to voters across the country, Iowa, New Hampshire, California, who have expressed real anxieties and concerns about how such broad change can be implemented. And so what she did was she heard these concerns from people. She talked to experts and said, let's be responsive. Let's address these issues and come up with a better path to Medicare for All. And so on Monday, we rolled out her plan, which is her Medicare for All plan. And it does a couple of key things. One, it extends the phase-in window for 10 years so that people can really feel comfortable and confident in the plan that they're going to get under this proposal. Second, it says, look, there's a lot of ways we can finance this. We can increase taxes on the wealthy. We can implement new trade taxes on Wall Street. But one thing I'm not comfortable doing that Senator Sanders does is ask people making as little as $29,000 a year to pay an extra 4% in taxes. So she says, if you're making $100,000 or less as a family in America, we're not going to raise your taxes to pay for this. We don't need to do that. We can offset that by taxing Wall Street trades that are very, very highly valuable.
So, Caitlin, how much explaining then does Harris have to do tonight about that plan?
Well, Senator Harris has struggled over the past few months to really define where she stands on the issue of Medicare for All. She's had quite a few stumbles on this issue, as we've talked about before. She has introduced this new plan that Ian just described. She's been attacked from Bernie Sanders, who says that having a role for private insurance here is not the right way to go. And then she's been attacked by Joe Biden, accusing her of not being realistic with voters about how much this would actually cost and how much it would you would need money from taxpayers to do this. Elizabeth Warren was asked several times last night about the issue of raising taxes on the middle class, and she didn't say no. She just said people would be paying less out of pocket. So this is a really difficult, tricky issue that Kamala Harris has yet to really define on the national stage. And it'll be interesting to see if her opponents feel like this is an opening they can go after her on. And if they don't, certainly I think we'll see the moderators press her for more specifics on this issue. Now, if Joe Biden is feeling under attack as well, we know that he is wanting to talk about health care. He wants to build upon Obamacare. He's been talking about that on the campaign trail, going after Bernie Sanders, of course, as well. Does he take a shot at Kamala Harris for her plan, or does he press her for more specifics? We'll have to wait and see, but this is certainly something that she's struggled to define on a national stage, and we'll see if she's able to come up with a cogent answer.
Antjuan, did you want to weigh in quickly on Harris's plan?
Yeah, I think that she's going to take most of the night trying to allowing her offense to be her defense and talking to her lieutenants, because the fact of the matter is the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren conversation sucked most of the healthcare oxygen out of the room last night. And tonight you have Joe Biden, who is campaigning on basically championing the ACA and strengthening it, which was very popular in the midterms, particularly by the statewide electeds that got elected in 2018. And here you have Kamala Kamala that has a mix between the two. So I think she's going to have to explain, but I also think she's going to have to pivot and really push back against the notion that her plan will blow up the system.
All right. Caitlin, Ed, Antjuan, and Leslie, thanks to all of you. Always a pleasure.